When I was younger, I used to detest being like my dad. Like, I'm not gonna be like my dad, because in my immature age, I used to look at my dad. He used to buy Costco jeans. He was always looking for a deal. And I was like, man, you frugal. Like, I'm never gonna be like my dad.
Right.
But now I wear it as the biggest badge of honor to be like my dad. One of the things my dad used to always say is, do they pay your light bill? And what he meant by that was, sometimes I would allow people to get underneath my skin. Sometimes I would allow people to, just like, make me feel less than who I was. And my dad would always say, are they paying your light bills?
Right.
And I'm like, no. He's like, so why does it even matter? I think as a black man, we've allowed society to dictate who we should be and what we should do and what we should say and how we should say it, especially our own community. We've allowed our own community to say that this is what you should think, this is what you should do, and this is the way you should go. And now I'm saying, no, I'm pushing back and saying, well, why? Who says that? The selection was a great example of that. Is I should vote one way just simply because I'm black?
Right.
I thought the reason why our ancestors fought for the freedoms that we have today was so that way I can vote for whoever I wanted to vote for.
Right. What up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode. I have a really, really good friend of mine. And it's funny, I call him a really good friend of mine, but actually, Ryan and I actually just met officially for the first time in September. We're in Arizona, and I was getting off a plane. I knew he was somewhere in Arizona because he was going to be speaking at the event we were hosting. And I met him. He was waiting for his luggage, and we made eye contact. We knew who each other was, and we were like homies since day one, day one. Like, it was like,
sure.
Yo, I ain't seen you forever. It was the
moment.
first time I met him, but it was like, I ain't seen you since last Christmas or whatever, right? So, anyways, I got my brother here, Ryan Tillman, with me in the house, man. I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, lady, man. Thanks again for having me, bro.
Yeah.
Like you said, bro, from the time we first connected, it's funny because B would always talk about you for years before I ever met you. So when, like you said, when we met, bro, it was like it was like my long lost brother.
Yeah, and vice versa. Like, exactly. I heard a bunch of stories. Like, I feel like I knew your whole story without even knowing you. So
yeah, man.
It's cool, man. But great people, great energy. And I love collaborating with people like you, man. 100%. It's always just love, and it's a good time, man. So
100%.
The reason I had you on the show today, I told you that I wanted to talk about, fatherhood a little bit. I want to give advice to the young men, the younger men watching this, and give them some advice and kick them some game because we've been through some stuff.
Yeah.
And also, I want to tie in some spirituality as well, because you told me about a fast you and your wife are doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that young men nowadays are missing, whether it's spirituality, whether it's Christianity, whether it's, they're Muslim, whether they're Buddhist, whatever it is, just believing in a higher power. So I want to tap into that as well, because I think that's something that young men should, aspire to be more like, to just believe in some kind of higher power.
100%.
You know what I'm saying? So anyways, I want to talk about your upbringing, man, to kind of lead up to where you are today. But what was your childhood like as far as, just kind of becoming the man you are today?
Yeah, so I was very blessed growing up, man, to have two parents, my mom and my dad, Earl Tillman and Nancy Tillman, and they were married for almost 40 years. My dad passed away, it'll be 3 years next month, or in March actually. But I was very blessed, and now being 37 years old and looking back at life and being way more mature now, you realize that it's the little things that are some of the biggest blessings. And when I say little things, little in meaning like in the world's eyes nowadays, people look at, two parents together as like, it's not that big a deal. But when you really understand the impact and gravity of that on your kids, it's humongous. And so I was very, very fortunate to have both of my parents together my whole life.
Yeah.
My dad grew up opposite of that kind of. So my dad, his dad, Earl Tillman Sr., he was a good dad in the sense of he wanted the best for his kids, but he wasn't the best dad from a, staying with his wife. He didn't stay with my grandma. They divorced. There was some abuse and things like that. And so he wasn't the greatest man in that capacity. So I think that really kind of drove my dad into saying, I'm going to be different than that. Like, I want the best for my kids like my dad did, but I want to show them the right example of how it's to be there for his wife and his kids. So growing up, I got to see it emulated in my dad what it truly means to be a good man, but also a good leader for my mom, and also a good leader for his kids. My dad was there for everything, like every sporting event, every practice, he was there. He was always inspiring me to go and get a higher education, so much so that my dad wanted to go. He went back to get his master's degree at an older age, just to show his kids, like, look, if I could do it, you can do it. And then my dad was also that guy too, where, you know, you look back when we used to go to the grocery stores, like we always said, man, everybody knows dad. Like everybody would hit up my dad. Hey Earl, how you doing? Hey Earl, how you doing?
Yeah. Damn, dad.
Yeah. So exactly. So in my eyes, like my dad was a celebrity.
Right.
And so I really just, you know, I always make this joke. I said this at his funeral. But when I was younger, I used to detest being like my dad. Like, I'm not gonna be like my dad, because in my immature age, I used to look at my dad. He used to buy Costco jeans. He was always looking for a deal. He was always, and I was like, man, you frugal. Like, I'm never gonna be like my dad.
Right.
But now I wear it as the biggest badge of honor to be like my dad. And you know, if my dad were still here, I think my dad would be proud of what he had did as a dad. But I always say, like, I'm just a bigger extension of who he was as a man. Like what my dad did, if my dad had the resources that I have today, my dad would have probably did way more than I did. That's how high capacity of a man he was.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome, man. That's beautiful. Like, I love stories like that, because I think that's almost like, you know, how does it go? It says when you're younger, you what is it? You idolize your dad, then you demonize them, then you humanize them afterwards. So I feel like that's kind of the normal, like, you're literally like, I'm not trying to be with my dad, whatever. But you know, you have him around long enough, and you become an adult, and you're a man yourself. Now you understand the decisions he's had to make all these years. He said, damn, that's actually, like, he did a lot. You know what I'm saying?
He made a lot of sacrifices.
Yeah, exactly. Like, my mom used to always tell me that too, man. Like, you know, growing up, I'd be upset about something. She'd say, you'll see when you get older. I used to hate that answer. Now I'm older. I have my own kids. And I said, damn, yeah. Matter of fact, sometimes I'll call her. My kids will be acting up, and I'll just call her. I'm like, I'm sorry for what I was doing when I was a kid, man, because dang, holy smokes.
Yeah.
So I understand, man, but I like the fact that you got to have that that understanding, you know, before he went with the ancestors. So I love hearing stories like that, man.
Yeah, 100%.
Who were you, like, in high school? Like, young man, like young Ryan. Who were you in high school?
So young Ryan, I've always been very outspoken. I've always had leadership traits. So if you go back, when I was 8 years old is when I really started getting involved in sports very, very heavily. And my dad was another thing my mom and dad did. Like, they always put me in all these different sports. So I did tennis when I was younger. I did golf when I was younger. I did football when I was younger. I did basketball, baseball. I did it all. And then eventually I started coming into the things that I really liked, which was football ultimately, and I ran track. So I think by doing sports, it opened me up to a lot of different friends, and it actually really strengthened me as a man, developed a stronger personality. And so when going into high school, like, I wanted to be that guy. Like, I always wanted to, I had friends that were that same way. So we had a lot of confidence between all of us, my boys. And so I wanted to be a lot, you know, just very outspoken. So I remember in middle school, actually going back, in middle school, I ran for ASB president, and I was ASB president. I ran for the king or whatever they used to do back in the day, and I got that, exactly. So then in high school, it was the same way. And then it didn't help that I was already the quarterback of the football team. So now that I'm the quarterback of the football team, you just automatically kind of get that leadership role instilled in you.
Right.
And so in high school, I was a guy that was, you know, I got good grades, but I was also like a popular kid.
Yeah.
And I say that in a non-arrogant way, saying I think it's just I was confident in who I was, and a lot of that I think was because of who my dad was. Like, my dad was like that. My dad was very confident in who he was.
Yeah.
And so and he always inspired me to go and find other role models. So it wasn't just him. It was this big old village mentality. So I can go back and I can look at specific people that my dad put in my life for specific reasons. Brian Rubin, Anthony Brown, Brian Harper, you know, all these different people in my life that in some way, shape, or capacity served as mentors in the village.
Right.
So when I didn't take my dad's advice, I will look at somebody else, like a Brian Rubin, who was more my age. He was probably about 10 years older than I was, but at least in my eyes, he was more like a bigger brother as a dad.
Right.
And Brian would give me the same advice as my dad, but yet I took it as word as bond from Brian just because I looked at him more. But my dad was wise in that. Like, he understood that.
Yeah.
And so that helped me out getting older, and having these strategic people in my place really, really contributed to the man I am now. So in high school, like I said, I played football. Then sophomore year, I'm still playing football. I end up getting moved up to play varsity my sophomore year. So I was the starting quarterback on varsity my sophomore year of high school, which was a
Oh,
learning experience in of itself because
yeah.
here I am, a young kid starting on varsity. And so it really taught me responsibility in that capacity. My dad also he had common sense. And so like I give you an example. Like my dad said, you don't need to be the smartest person, but just know how to play the game. So, for example, he was like, Ryan, you may not like math, but when you go to math class, play the game. Meaning, sit in front of the class, ask questions, and then get to develop a good relationship with your teacher. Because what happens is let's say you go and take that math test, and when you take that test, let's say the grade that you got on that math test was on the verge of being a C or a D. If you spend all this time with your teacher, if you've invested time asking questions, sitting in the front, do you think she wants to give you that D or do you want to think she wants to give you that C? Of course, she's going to want to bump you, give you that C because she cares about you. Whereas if you don't care, she ain't going to care and she going to bump you down to that D. And so learn to play the game. And so my dad really taught me how to play the game of life. You don't got to be the smartest. It's not about what you know. It's often about who you know. So this is game that my dad put me up on and now I live my life by it.
Yeah, dude, I love it, man. I love it, man. Your dad was a wise man. Like a couple things, actually. You dropped a couple of gems right there, man. And one of them was, I love the fact that your dad was so wise on the topic of understanding that it takes a village. And in this case, we're talking about multiple different men helping chime in and give wisdom as well. Because I think a lot of times, at least what I hear, is a lot of dads, they almost get like jealous of another man, giving wisdom or guiding or whatever. And I understand to a degree because you're like, well, I want to be the one, to give them the game. But sometimes people are parent deaf.
Yeah.
It's not intentional that we're just not trying to listen.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is. But, you have to have other people that you can tap into and ask. Like Marcus Sims was one of, like an older brother to me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so we have to have different people in different areas with different experiences and backgrounds to be like, okay, maybe like my mom will get on me, man. She watches all the episodes. What's up, mom? She would she would always just be like, oh my gosh, just because Pedro said it, now you want to listen. Because she'll tell me something. I'm like, oh, okay. Let me ask B. And then B would be like, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Not even telling him what my mom said. And then I'm like, oh, yeah. I talked to B and he said, I should do this. She said, just because B said it,
exactly.
now you're going to. So I think it's just how it is sometimes.
Same thing we do in marriage too. My wife will give me some advice and I hear it from somebody else. So it's just, I think it's a human nature that we do those things.
Right.
And one of the other things I wanted to point out too is I realize like things aren't, you've heard the saying before, but things aren't taught, they're caught. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of remember that with my own boys now is like as much as I want to drill into their head sometimes they just have to catch it by my example or somebody else's example. And because boys will be boys, bro. And boys, we are hard-headed by nature. A lot of us are.
Yeah.
And so I often, even sometimes it could be easy to just drill stuff down in them. But sometimes I'm like, man, I just got to lead by example and pray that, if I do what I'm supposed to be doing, then they'll catch it just like I caught it from my dad.
Right. And you pick your battles. You know what I'm saying? You
100%.
pick your battles. Like, you're like, you know what? That's not that big of a deal. I don't have time for that right now. Maybe circle back later. But there's some like, no, we need to spearhead that immediately. So 100%. I get it. You pick your battles. One other thing that I wanted to kind of have you expound on was you talked about where your confidence came from. You basically said you derived a lot of your confidence from your dad and who he was, because he was a great example. There are young men that might be watching this right now that don't have the best example, whether that be they don't have a dad in their life, or maybe they don't have an older brother to look up to, or they just don't have that masculine example. So, what do you think that they should do in order to increase their confidence if they don't have that masculine role model in their life?
Well, number one, you brought up something earlier, spirituality. So I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, and I think he is a person who I found my identity in, no doubt about it. And when you know that my identity is found in him, then you never have to worry about anybody bringing you down for who you are. I tell this in schools, I speak in schools all the time, and I say you have to learn to respect yourself. And if you can learn to respect yourself, then you'll never ever have to worry about somebody disrespecting you again. So for those that don't have a fatherly figure, you do have a fatherly figure found in Christ, number one. But then second to that, from a humanistic lens, from this, living the life that we live, because it's not easy, you have to identify people that you can serve as mentors in your life. One of the things I've always tried to do is I've always tried to find mentors in every aspect of my life. So when it comes to my spirituality, I have mentors.
Yeah.
When it comes to my physical fitness, I have mentors. When it comes to business, I have mentors. When it comes to being a good dad, I have mentors. So identify or prioritize the areas of your life right now. So whatever stage you're at, you could be a teenager in high school, you could be in college, you could be in middle school, you could be a grown adult, whatever it is, there's going to be certain seasons of your life that you're going to go through. And so you can find mentors of those areas that can help you get to that next stage and level up. So that's one of the biggest things that I've learned to do to be confident in who I am. And then the last thing I'll say too is one of the things my dad used to always say is, do they pay your light bill? And what he meant by that was sometimes I would allow people to get underneath my skin. Sometimes I would allow people to, just like, make me feel less than who I was. And my dad would always say, are they paying your light bills?
Right.
And I'm like, no. He's like, so why does it even matter?
That's some
Why does it even matter?
Game.
And so, one of the things I've always said is like, and my dad would say this too, if they're not talking about you, then you're doing something wrong. So now my goal is always to get people to talk about me in some capacity, whether it's bad, good, it don't matter.
Right.
But if they're talking about you, that means you're doing something right. That means you're making an impact. That means you're doing something. But if they're not talking about you, then that means you're doing something wrong. So stop tripping that they're saying stuff about you, and then always come back to, if they ain't paying your light bill right, it don't matter.
Right.
And oftentimes they're helping you pay your light bills by them talking about you, because
other people
boost. Exactly, because everybody want to hear about you.
Right.
They always say all news, or what they always say, all publicity is good publicity. Same idea.
Yeah, 100%. But that's a good perspective too. I like that, because I call it like developing your thick rhino skin, where you're like, when you first, maybe just thinking of content or getting into business, you first, get into the field, you start being a little bit more personable about, sharing your experience online, or your perspective online, your opinions online. And because you post it publicly, people can also publicly disagree with you and say some crazy stuff, right? And it's very easy to feel like they're attacking you personally, because sometimes they are. But as you continue to go and you grow, you're like, all right, cool, I'm kind of getting that thick skin now, where I'm like, it doesn't bother me anymore, man. I think this generation is lacking that for sure. Because we see it, man, with, I don't want to flag and say the word, but like the people, who are hurting themselves and, taking their lives and things like that. And it's a lot of, man, it's a lot of like, crazy stuff and really sad, things that happen because of this generation is just different. They can be very brutal online, and then on top of that, there's a lot of mental health stuff going on right now with these new kids for sure, man. But as far as,
can I say something on that point real quick?
Yeah, please.
For this next generation, if somebody's listening to it, I truly believe, this next generation that we're looking at right now is often looked upon as being soft. And they say that every generation. My dad's generation said we was soft. So there is that aspect of where every generation goes by, you're always going to think the next generation coming after you is soft. But I really believe that there's two ways this next generation could go. They could be really, really soft, which is what we've been seeing. They don't know how to overcome adversity. They are very, in many ways, lazy. And it is lazy not because it's their fault, but because of what we created. Example, my son, he really wants to use ChatGPT to do his homework. And as much as I would love for him to use it, and as much as I know it's valuable for him to use it, because that's where the future is going, there's still a point where I've told him, you have to earn the right to use ChatGPT. That means that you have to think with your mind. You have to learn to critically think and understand how to problem solve before I can let you use that. And so this generation, they just want the end result right now, but we have to still teach how to critically think in order to get to that end result. So this generation could be very, very soft. Or I say this could be one of the strongest generations we've ever seen. And the reason I say this is because this generation has experienced something that you and I have never really had to experience in our lifetime. We had the COVID generation, where those years in school and learning were very, very detrimental to them. This generation has also grown up with nothing but social media. So when I was in high school, I think when I was leaving high school, MySpace had just hit the scene. But it was still very limited in the capacity of what you can do. Same thing with Facebook. We still interacted in person more than we did online. Right. This generation, all they do is interact online. And so those are some of the leading contributing factors to depression, suicide, or depression, all the other stuff. And so if they learn to overcome that adversity, if they learn how to strive to be confident in who they are, if they learn to how to stop letting or allowing people to shape who they should be, they have the potential to be stronger than we ever were, because those are things that we never really had to deal with. So I truly believe, depending on how you look at it, they could be one of the strongest generations if they so choose to. But if not, they could also be one of the weakest generations we've seen.
Right, 100%, man. So I'm gonna spearhead this real quick, man, because we gotta talk about this. I don't want to make this just a strictly black conversation, but I do want to pivot real quick and ask you, because you just said something right now talking about being strong mentally and being able to, basically stand on your core values, regardless of, what people think. You're immovable. You're right there, right? So you talked about you being, Christian, which is, same here. But then there are people that are not, and they, we see what's going on in the country, and they try to demonize the religion together. And then also, you're black. I don't know if you know this, right? You're black. Yeah, exactly. You just found out. And like you think exactly, like, I'm what? What the hell? Nah. And so you're black and you're in law enforcement. And then there's some people that black people, the culture just doesn't vibe with law enforcement with maybe their past experience, or maybe they heard of somebody going through something. Regardless, they have some negative, connotation of what law enforcement is. But you don't seem to let that bother you. Not only do you not let it bother you, but you lean into it and you talk about, you're going to be open on your page. If people watch this, they clicked it because they know who you are.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, now you know.
Yeah.
And so you're very open about talking about these things and spearheading these topics. And a lot of people can't do that, bro. Like a lot of people can't, get hate comments and just continue to post and show up the next day and do it again. Like, how did you learn how to develop that?
Man, that's a great question. Kind of goes back to, I had to start realizing who I was and what my purpose was. My purpose was to unify people, bridge divides. And the first step to that was knowing who I was in Christ, number one, because as long as I'm everything to him, I don't have to worry about being nothing to everybody else. It really just becomes a non-factor. If I'm everything to him, I could be nothing to everybody else, because that's all that matters is number one. So when that was said, then you have the physical side again, the human side, humanistic side, which is, well, people still going to talk about you. That don't mean it's easy to look through. And that's when it gets back to what my dad would always say is like, hey, look, like, people are just by nature, they want to bring you down. The more success you have, the more they want to bring you down. Somebody I've really, really been, we talk about identifying mentors. Somebody I've really actually found or developed a lot more respect for lately is Stephen A. Smith.
Dude.
He is.
Let's talk about it.
He is becoming a genius in doing this.
Right.
We're addressing realities, even if there's pushback, but doing it in a way where he's not necessarily dogging you out as a person, but dogging your opinion out.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I think I've learned to do is when people attack me, I realize it's not a personal attack on me. I learn it's more of a personal attack on the substance of what I'm talking about. When people attack me, it's not necessarily attacking me as a person. It's more so they're attacking my opinion on how I view things. Now, there's some people that may just say, I don't like me, but that's too serious. I don't really care about that.
Right.
But I've learned that if I continue to stay true to the call, true to what I've been called to do, then over time I start winning people over. And I've seen that happen time and time again. And that's what I really love about Stephen A. Smith, is that he is really showing himself as being a guy that's in the middle, a guy that will hear you out. And if he disagrees, he'll tell you he disagrees very vocally, but he won't necessarily dog you out as a person and vice versa.
Right.
That's what I've been trying to do with my life. And I think as a black man, I think I have a responsibility to do that. I think if I'm being completely transparent and 100, I think as a black man, we've allowed society to dictate who we should be and what we should do and what we should say and how we should say it, especially our own community. We've allowed our own community to say that this is what you should think, this is what you should do, and this is the way you should go. And now I am saying, I'm pushing back and saying, well, why? Who says that? The selection was a great example of that. Is I should vote one way just simply because I'm black.
Right.
I thought the reason why, our ancestors fought for the freedoms that we have today was so that way I can vote for whoever I wanted to vote for.
Right.
So though that's what really flames my fuel that I have, or if it's the fuel to my flame, is because I'm like, man, like I have an obligation for my sons,
right,
to not have to cower to what the world wants them to think.
Right, 100%, man. It's because, you know, you said it all right there. Like, you have to be able to stand on your square, and every man should have his own opinion. And if it happens to align with another person, then cool, you know, whatever. Like, there's no static either way. Men should be
Yeah.
able to disagree on something, and we can have a conversation or debate or whatever. But it still remains, you know, respectful, and there's no ad hominem attacks, and it's just
Yeah.
like, we're just talking about the issue. And I think this, you think that. Maybe it's because of your background and my background, whatever. But I think that is another thing too, where, you know, man, it just feels like you can't step out of line and have your own opinion if it differs from what the collective thinks. It's a wrap. You get the black card pulled. It's the whole thing.
You saw it recently with Nelly. You saw it recently with Snoop.
Yeah.
You saw it recently with a lot of these guys, all over politics.
Right.
All over politics. And
Right.
I mean, man, but that's a story for a different day. I know this is all about, you know, the Squire Programming, but
No.
I think it goes back to that though. It's like
Right.
the kids that I want to raise,
Mm-hmm.
the young men that we want to raise are men that don't have to cower because somebody thinks differently than you do.
Right.
And that you can thrive and still believe your opinion and still get along. And that's one of the things I really prided my life on, is that I've been able to have my own opinions and think the way I want to do and have good relationships with people that think completely the opposite from who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not worried about, like, if you think different, that's totally fine, bro. You have your opinion. That don't mean we can't have a relationship. So those are the type of things that I want to teach my kids to do.
It's major, man. Speaking on that, on the Snoop situation, because I just see it as a man that changed his mind. You know, people make it deep and be like, you know, Tupac warned us years ago. He didn't like Snoop. He was phony and, you know, whatever. And I think that men and people in general, I know obviously this is catered towards men, which is why I'm saying men, but anyone should be able to change their mind. You know, what do you think about the young man watching that maybe is on the, like, teetering, like basically what Stephen A. Smith has been, you know, he's been teetering, and you're like, I see you low key, you know, kind of coming over, whatever. What do you think about that? Like, I think we should be able to change our minds.
Oh, you absolutely should. Actually, if anything, I think it reveals how much of a stronger person you're able to do, how strong of a person you are if you are changing your mind. You know, it's easy to just have an opinion and stick with it because that's what you said. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to have to go back and say, I was wrong. Mm-hmm. I make videos all the time. I'll give you an example. The George Floyd situation. Mm-hmm. When that video initially came out, I said that it was murder. Now, I still think that Derek Chauvin and what he did in that situation was wrong, but I don't think it was murder. And I had to come out later on and say, like, I think I was wrong in my initial assessment. And to tell you how difficult that is, especially in my profession, especially in my position, that's very difficult to do. Yeah. But I did it because it was the right thing to do. Like, it wasn't murder. It was should have never happened. And I think that Derek Chauvin, no doubt about it, contributed to his death in not, you know, getting him the medical aid he needed. But the way it was broadcast to the world, we utilized that situation to sensationalize police relationships with the minority community, and I think it was wrong. So I'm using that as an example to say that if somebody changes their opinion, it should show actually the strength that they are willing to come out and say, I was wrong. That's humility.
Right.
And humility is a very, very valuable quality that not a lot of people possess these days. Is because you're so afraid of what people are going to think or say. And I've been guilty of this, that you start getting away from doing the right things for the right reasons.
Right.
So when Snoop did that, man, like, and the funny thing about it is, and I've been doing some, you know, watching videos and stuff on it, like, he didn't even necessarily do it because he's a big fan of Trump.
Right.
He did it because the guy who asked him to do it sponsors his programs for the youth.
Right.
So
people are not trying to, but Trump was going to be at the party. You knew he was going to be at the party, and I'm like, that's crazy.
It doesn't matter. And so even with the whole Donald Trump thing, whether you like Donald Trump or you don't like Donald Trump, like, it shouldn't matter. Like, a person should be free to make the decision they want to. Like, I've taken a lot of criticism as a black man for being conservative. And I didn't always grow up in a conservative house. So that's where me and my dad differed. My dad was more on the liberal side of things, and I've been on the conservative side of things. And we differ in that capacity.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of friends, black people, who are conservative. I have a lot of black friends who have been pardoned by Donald Trump that have gotten out of prison because of that man. Yeah. So the way they see life is different from the way most people see life in perspective. So I try to take a snapshot of both perspectives and try to find my own opinion based on real lived experience as opposed to what I saw on YouTube.
Right.
And you know what I mean? Like
That
when
part.
people tell me like, oh, you shouldn't have this relationship with that person. So I'm like, but I know people that are connected to this man. Like legitimately connected to this man that are black people whose lives have been forever changed for the better because
Right.
of this man. So how do I say that this man is racist and say this man is this and that? Yeah, I mean, he's definitely not a showman. I'll tell you that much now.
Yeah.
Like, dude, definitely not a showman. He don't get an A for showmanship.
Right.
But at the same time, you can't necessarily, like, if you look at our last administration, those dudes did some of the most racist stuff we've ever seen in our history, said some of those racist stuff. So remove politics from it all and just look at the context of who a person is. That's what Martin Luther King said. Look at the context of a person's character.
Right. Right.
Ain't nothing changed.
Right, exactly, man. Dude, I love it. I love it, man. See, and by the way, just for if you guys didn't know, man, you know what I'm saying? I guess it's a new thing. You maybe heard about it, maybe you haven't. Being black and conservative is in now. It's sexy now. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it is what it is. Speaking of changing your mind, man, in November, or was it late October? I guess it doesn't matter, but it was before the election happened. I had made a video on YouTube talking about how I changed my mind about how, because I used to hate Trump, bro. Like, I'm talking like
Me
in
too.
2020, like I couldn't
Me
stand him
too.
to the point where I have my own clothing brand and I had a red hat and I wouldn't wear that hat. Even though it was my clothing brand, it didn't even say MAGA, it didn't say anything on there. I wouldn't wear the color red on my head because I didn't want, people from afar, they see, like, is that MAGA? Get him! And I was like, nah, I'm not trying to deal with that. So I wouldn't even wear the freaking hat, right? And I was basically explaining that in the video, like I was wrong about this, I was wrong about that, and I think that more of us should be able to do that. And obviously, when somebody does that, it's helpful to not have people jump down your throat and say, oh, he's flip-flopping, whatever. People just change their minds, man. And I think,
Nothing wrong with that.
yeah, I think more men in general, not just younger men, but just men in general, need to practice that, and doing things to do the right thing, like you said, instead of just trying to fit into a box.
Well, and if you think about it, so if I went through all my years of voting, first year of Obama, I voted for him. I mean, that was a phenomenal campaign that they ran as far as a genius. It's genius.
Sure.
It was all ran on hope. It was something new. We had never seen an African American in office. So I was all of it. And I was in college, so I wasn't really following the politics side. I was following the image of it and what it may represented. And I don't think that was wrong. I still don't think that was wrong. Just because if you look at my given time, I was young, not knowing much, so I went with the flow. Then the next election comes around, Obama and I think it was, what's his name? Not Cheney. I can't remember. But I remember having some second thoughts about voting for Obama. And,
Was it Romney? Was it like
Mitt Romney?
Yeah.
So sadly, and I'll admit this, I didn't vote that year. And as much as I love black people, I love our people, bro, I couldn't find myself voting for him a second term because at that time in my life, I started finding myself getting more closer to God. And I realized that the closer I got to God and the closer I started realizing and understanding the principles and values that I should have in my life, it didn't align with that agenda. And I didn't know Mitt Romney and I wasn't a big follower. So I just opted out. Then the third election comes around, now Trump and Hillary, and I hated Trump just like you did. I didn't like what he said. I didn't like how he sounded. I thought he was arrogant, all these other things, and I couldn't stand Hillary either. So I opted out to vote again. But in that time, one thing that was changing in my life is I kept getting closer to God. And as I kept getting closer to God, I started getting more wisdom. And the wisdom that I started realizing was, hey, you need to start looking at issues as opposed to a person. Stop putting people on pedestals and look at the issues. And you vote in line with the values structure that my Christian values were.
Right.
And so that's what allowed me to get to the point where I'm at now from a conservative standpoint. It's not about a person, it's more about values.
Sure.
And so the reason I bring all that up is because the young men that we're talking to right now, they need to get to a place where they can learn, critically think for themselves, and decipher information for themselves, and stop letting other people think for them. That right there, if they can have that one trait, it will take them further than what they could imagine. Just because the culture we have, especially in the black community, is one that we have to go with the flow. Right. And if they say it, then it must be true. And if you try to do this, then you're wrong. You're an Uncle Tom. You're a sellout. And I've been called Uncle Tom and sellout more than I can even describe. So I think that right there has also made it easier for me to say, you know what, I'm gonna be who I am. I don't care what you think anymore.
Right, right. It's man, I'm telling you, it's crazy because, in the beginning, we talked about how it gets to you, and then you kind of get thick skinned, and it's kind of just like it's washing off, and then now you're just like, bro, you're all you're doing is basically making me more powerful. Like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because now my mindset is stronger. I'm not worried about what anybody's saying, and I'm just being me. Before it was almost like, same with me. Now I'm speaking just about myself. You kind of like, I don't know if I want to say this on YouTube. It's gonna be here forever, or I don't know if I want to share this opinion. But if you're being honest and that's what you believe in, then why would you not? You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? So real quick, one of the last things anyways is I noticed that, the common thing in your answers is that you bring up God and you bring up a higher power. How has, actually before I ask that question, were you raised in a Christian household, or did you have, I guess, like a kind of like a conversion story at some point?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up in a Catholic household. So
Okay.
my mom was Catholic. My dad was actually Baptist, but we were raised with Catholic practices. So I made my first communion, went to confirmation, all those different things. And every time, like when I was younger, I never really had an active relationship. It was all very legalistic, meaning like, you got to go to the priest to confess your sins. You got to do the Hail Mary and all the other stuff. And it was more of a ritual as opposed to a relationship. And then as I got older, when I went to college, I remember there was this void in my life, like something was missing. I knew it was spiritual, and I just didn't know. I couldn't pin it though. And I knew that every time I went to like a Christian church or something like that, I knew I felt better walking out of there. So I remember in 2007, their old quarterback Randall Cunningham used to play for, the Minnesota Vikings and Philadelphia Eagles. He is a pastor in Vegas, which is where I went to school, UNLV. He's an
Nice.
alumni, and he came to one of the practices one time, and he invited us out to his church. So me and my buddy, we were looking for a church at the time. We went to his church, loved it. Part of the reason we loved it because after church they sold chicken and waffles, and those chicken and waffles were fire.
They were
But
hidden.
yeah, they were hidden. So couldn't wait for church to be over just to get the chicken and waffles. That's a story for a different day. So we kept going, and then I remember one day he called me up and he said, "Hey man, why don't you come down here and get baptized today?" Now, when I was younger, I was baptized as a Catholic.
Right.
But this new baptism as a Christian was different. I was basically dedicating myself to have a personal relationship with my Lord. And the thing that I loved about Christianity was I didn't have to go through any rituals to get to our Lord. I didn't have to, he was going to take me as I was, and I didn't feel judged. It didn't mean that I can't just live a life full of sin,
Right.
but it meant that he had forgiven us of our sins. And so I felt like I was actually full when I actually rededicated my life to serving Christ. And over the years, man, the more and more people I meet, the more people, even other religious conversions I've heard from Muslim to Christian, like it's just crazy. And so I have, in 2007, when I rededicated my life to serving the Lord, I've been trying to walk with him ever since. It doesn't mean that I haven't had some there's been some times, no doubt about it, that
Sure.
I've fallen off. But as I get older and wiser, I realize that that's the only way I can live my life. It's the only thing. When my dad passed away and when my wife's dad passed away, it was the only thing that gave me peace, is because they were both believers in Christ as well. And the Bible says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Like if I didn't have that hope, then I would be hopeless. I would just live a life like, man, like what's the purpose of living if like it was all just to die?
Yeah.
So I do have hope that we will live again. And that is why I center everything, my household, my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids. It's all centered around that first. And how do I get that relationship stronger?
I love it, man. I love it. One of the last things, or I guess I'll say the last thing I want to ask you, Ryan, is you have your two sons in front of you right now, and they're going through, whatever they're going through. They're struggling, though, and they need some advice, some fatherly advice. What advice do you give them to get through that and kind of, get strong or kind of, muster up the strength to be able to get through that?
Yeah, good question. So I have two sons and a daughter, which my daughter is different because the way I raise her is different from my
different, yeah.
sons. But as it relates to my son specifically, I'll use an example. of my son, my oldest son. About 2 years ago, we were driving to baseball practice.
How old's your oldest son?
He's 11 now.
He's 11 now.
At the time, he was right around 9.5.
Okay, cool.
And my son naturally has been a good baseball player. Like he was he started late, but he was natural in the sense that when he picked it up, like we were like, oh wow, he has arm, like he could do this. But he compares himself, to other people, and so this imposter syndrome starts to set in. I'm not that guy. I can't do this. And I'll never forget driving to a practice, and my son was just very, very upset. Like, really, you could tell. Like, I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, what's going on? And he just broke down crying and said, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And he was terribly crying.
Yeah.
It was sad. It broke my heart.
Yeah.
And I was like, son, like, you always will be good enough. Like, what standards? Who are you comparing yourself to make you think that you're not good enough? It's okay to make mistakes. Right. Mistakes are actually good for you because the faster you make mistakes, the faster you realize how to not make that same mistake twice. And I said, you have two options right now. We're driving to practice. I said, option number one is you can just quit. We can turn around and go home. And you'll never have to pick up a baseball bat again. Option number two is once we get to practice, you can wipe the tears off your eyes. You can wipe the boogers out of your nose. You can suck it up. You can go in there and hit adversity right in the face and just practice and practice and practice until you get better. Because at the time, you were struggling with hitting.
Okay.
And I said, and right now, those are your two options. But what I'm going to tell you next is how we're going to go. You don't have the choice of picking option one. Mm-hmm. You have to pick option two. Mm-hmm. I said, the rest of the world, they'll let you quit. The rest of the road say it's okay to take the easy road, but I'm not building you to take the easy road. I'm building you to take the tough road. So you're going to go, you're going to face this adversity, and that adversity is going to help you with the next adversity you come in life. So the advice I give to the person that's listening to this podcast right now is like, we have to learn to embrace adversity. Adversity was created for a good thing. I mean, there are good things about adversity. You have to learn, though, to do the hard things, and nobody wants to do the hard things. I just did a presentation at a high school last week, and I used the example of comparing it to the movie The Matrix, where Neo had the opportunity of selecting the blue or the red pill. And I said, most people would want to take the easy way. Most people would take the road that's most traveled because there's no friction. But when you take the path of least resistance, which is what Neo did in that movie, he had to go through training. He had to go through a whole mind-blowing alteration, but it ultimately allowed him to become the one. And I look at life like that. Adversity is what's put in our life for that reason, and so that way we can overcome and adapt and become stronger. And so we have to do the hard things. Just like right now, I mentioned before we got on the podcast today, like me and my wife in our spiritual walk, we're doing a fast. And we fast every year, once a year, typically sometimes twice. But usually we do a Daniel's fast, which is where you just eat food and veggies that come from the ground. Well, this time we said, hey, we're going to do no food. So we're approaching tonight will be 72 hours of zero food.
Crazy.
And bro, I'm trying to tell you, oh man, it is not easy.
Yeah, I know.
It is not easy. But that's when spiritually I realized that my dependence is not on bread alone, but the words that come from him. My dependence is on him, but I also realize that I'm much tougher than I think.
Right.
I can withstand much more than I think. And if I can go through this, then the next obstacle that comes our way, I'm like, of course I can get through that. So whoever's listening, embrace that adversity. Adversity is a good thing. Don't mean it's going to be easy,
right,
but there is a tunnel to come out on the other side.
Right. Let's go, man. He talking to somebody, man. He was talking to me. I'm feeling it. I love it, man. That's some real advice, man. I appreciate you so much for coming on the show, man. This is the first of many.
Yeah.
It was so smooth and just so easy to talk to you, man. Like I said, I feel like we've known each other forever, man. So, Ryan, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Flats, my guy.
Hey,
you're doing God's work, bro. Keep doing it, bro. Like, everybody that's in this Squire's program, you already are set apart. Even by you listening to this podcast, it puts you in a different category. It puts you in the 1% club. You know, 1%ers don't do this. 1%ers aren't trying to get better. So if you're listening to this, whether you're a dad, whether you're a son, this is putting you into another class of nobody else. And the 1% is the ones that usually the cream always rises to the crop, and the 1% is the cream.
Let's go. Ryan Tillman, everybody. Appreciate you guys watching. Talk soon.